Are you a doofus? Take the test and find out. That is the subject for this week's video. I'm going to use some notes, and one of the things that people oftentimes miss is, especially if you're having a meeting, you ought to have some notes. You ought to have what you want to cover, the bullet points, etc. That way you can actually impart or ask the questions that you need. So pay attention to the traits and mistakes that lead to someone thinking you're a doofus, and then I'm going to give you some examples and some items in which you can test yourself to see whether or not you fall into the doofus category. So, poor communication skills. Consistently sending poorly written emails with typos, unclear instructions, inappropriate tones leading to confusion or frustration. Now, most of the time, someone will decide if you're a doofus or not really at the very outset of an interaction. So first impressions, super important. As everybody's heard, you never have a second chance to make a first impression, so that's true. In today's world, with texting, communication skills, and particularly writing skills, are incredibly poor. So pay attention to that. There's tools that are like Grammarly that will correct those things. Use those tools. When I see, and I frequently see it, a typo, a mistake in written communication, I said, you know, this person doesn't even take the time to make sure what they said is correct. And if you've listened to me enough, you know how I lost a very big hitter when I was trying to recruit him for the board by making one typo in a letter I sent. Ignoring deadlines. Regularly missing project deadlines without any valid reason. And I would even disagree, even with a valid reason. If you're going to miss a deadline, explain why. You've got a deadline coming up, you got a problem making it, and you might have an ability to get the right resources to not have that. Inappropriate behavior, you can define that any way you want to, but certainly that can get you off in the wrong foot. You know, making jokes when you're first meeting someone, or maybe even later, talking about religion, talking about politics, usually doesn't help you much. Not being punctual. This is a big one for me. I am amazed at consistently how many people are late for meetings. And if you're late for meetings, it sends an initial really bad reaction from the other person. And if you're in a negotiation, you start off by saying you're sorry. So why do you want to do that? One of the things when I was hiring a lot of people is that literally, if somebody was a minute late, I would say to the HR guys, I don't need to see that person. And they say, well, you know, they get lost on the way. Yeah? Well, last night they stayed in a motel, right? Or a hotel. So why didn't they drive? It's 10 minutes. Why didn't they drive and make sure they knew how to do it? I frequently did that when I got into town. I would drive to where I wanted to go the next morning for a meeting so I didn't make a mistake. Failure to prepare. Enough said, right? Know what you're going to say. Know something about the other person. Do some background, etc. Another pet peeve of mine, over-promising and under-delivering. Well, I'll get that done by this date. This comes and goes. It's much better to tell someone when you're going to do something, get agreement on that, and do it more quickly than not. Blaming others for mistakes. Oftentimes, you know, I'm sorry. Really hate to hear it, because if you're truly sorry, it wouldn't have happened in almost all cases. But, well, this person didn't do that, that person didn't do that. I've suggested many times to watch a History Channel series called The Selection, where they took Special Forces operators, took regular people, and put them through a selection process. One of the instructors for that is a Navy SEAL, was a Navy SEAL. And so I was curious about doing something with him that he and my mentor were doing to help veterans. I found a way to contact him. It wasn't all that difficult, as we've talked about. I reached out to him, left a voicemail. He was flying back from a deployment, landed on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast of the United States. And when he landed, he checked his messages and he called me. and it was about midnight. I was in bed, asleep. Bad habit of mine is I kept my phone next to me. I heard the ping. I listened to the voicemail, got up out of bed and called him. Going the extra mile is certainly something that will impress people and not make you a doofus. So he talked about what I wanted to do. He said anything to help veterans, he was willing to do it. He then told me that he was digging himself out financially from a hole on a venture he tried. But he said, I got myself in the hole, I'll get myself out of the hole. It was all my issue. And he took responsibility for it, okay? Ignoring company policies, pretty much this is going to be your company, so you set the policies and make sure people adhere to them. Lack of initiative, waiting to be told what to do instead of taking initiative steps and solving problems. When someone comes to me and they say, well, what should I do? I typically say, what do you think you should do? And oftentimes they'll say, I don't know. And so, okay, so go back and think about it and bring me 2 or 3 solutions. We'll talk about those. Maybe we'll accept one, maybe we won't. But it will begin to develop people that work for you. Another big one, failure to listen. People listen terribly. So if you're talking to a big hitter and he or she explains something and you're thinking about the next thing you're going to say, and you ask a question which is something that they just explained to you or previously explained, yeah, they're going to think you're a doofus. So pay attention. The overreacting to feedback. Most of the feedback you're going to get, especially from mentors, etc., is valid feedback. So take it, ask if you're confused about it, but don't overreact and become defensive. Unprofessional social behavior. It's something that didn't happen before, but plenty of people can do things and get reputations for things that are inappropriate, bad, whatever you want to call it. But the place today where that can easily be seen is social media. So when you're talking to big hitters, when you're having a meeting with prospects, oftentimes they'll check you out. They'll check your social media. So go and look at that. Scrape it for things that will eventually hurt you. Talking about politics, talking about religion. You'll probably connect with half a group and the other half you won't connect with. You just have to look at the U.S. and how tribal we've become between Democrats and Republicans to see. You end up talking to a Democrat and you agree with him, great. But the Republicans you'll turn off and vice versa. So remember that. But showing pictures, showing activities that aren't appropriate, if you really want to appear professional, scrub that pretty carefully. Okay. And then, what are some doofus tests that you can do or that'll be done on you? But let's say you are hiring somebody. Inconvenient times for the meeting. Make them come at a time, a Saturday morning, a Sunday morning, birthdays, holidays, fighting traffic, all of those things, certainly. When you go to a meeting, are you early, late, on time? I would encourage you to forget about on time and be early. Why? You are then ready. Sometimes you'll have a technical issue. Sometimes Zoom won't work. Sometimes your computer will not behave right and you'll have to restart it. So you'll go through and have to restart it. Then you'll be late. Then you'll be explaining why you were late, which the other person doesn't really care about. Dress. Are you dressed appropriate? Is it appropriate to wear a suit and tie or a dress? Are you seeing a plumber where that might not be appropriate? If you're on Zoom, what's the background look like? I have literally had meetings where someone is on Zoom like this, and in the background, not even blurred, is a bed with dirty clothes on it, etc., etc. Okay? For every meeting that you do, have an exact desired outcome and have agenda points. There is nothing wrong, I'm doing it right now, with having the points you want to discuss. Nothing wrong also with taking notes. You can say, this is an important meeting, would you mind if I took notes? Because I want to be sure I remember everything we talk about. the other person's usually going to be impressed with that and not have any issue with that. So do you have an exact desired outcome from the meeting? What is it at the end of the meeting you want to have accomplished? What are the next actions? Have all that thought out. You know, I'm not a big fan of templates. I'm more a fan of bullet points, which is what I'm doing right here. I had someone that said, would it be okay if I read my opening discussion when I talked to somebody? And I said, read it. Read it. Yeah. And he said, yeah, it's 15 minutes. Now, that's not a conversation, that's a lecture. So think about those things. And a really interesting example of successful meetings, hiring people, evaluating people, was done by Henry Ford. And Henry Ford, so the story goes, was looking to hire someone. He had two candidates. The grades, the education, the background, all of them were essentially the same. He took them at the same time to dinner. And at the end of the dinner, he said, I'm going to hire you and I'm not going to hire you. And the person who he wasn't going to hire said, well, we really didn't even talk about any real business, so you really don't know what I could do with the business, because they talked about general things, not a lot of business. And he said, well, let me explain why I'm making that decision. When the meal came, person A, who he was going to hire, tasted the steak first before putting anything on it. You just went ahead and put salt on it without testing it. And I want people who are going to evaluate the situation and then take action and offer solutions, not assume that they know what the solution is going to be before they have the facts. Tasting the steak first was an example of that. The second one is an interesting one, and that was, he said to the person he wasn't going to hire, you were very complimentary to me, but the wait staff, you weren't. You were dismissive to them, you were rude to them, and I want people that are going to be able to interact with people at all levels in an organization, build a team, et cetera, and that's going to be critical to what we do. So you treated me okay, but you didn't treat them okay. Used to go to a restaurant in Williamsburg, Virginia, which was called Food for Thought, and they had all kinds of sayings on the wall, famous people sayings. And one of the ones was, the true character of a person can be seen from how they treat people who can do neither something to help them or to hurt them. Interesting to remember that. Okay, follow-up, super important, not to be thought of as a doofus. Have had a mentee who ended up talking to a potential seller. The potential seller said, well, yeah, this sounds interesting. Call me back in 2 weeks, I think it was. He forgot about that. He called back 6 weeks later when he was like, oh, I never called that person. And said, would you be interested in talking? And she said, yeah, I wondered what happened. I never heard from you like I had hoped I would. And no, I wouldn't be interested in selling the business because you really opened my eyes. And since our discussion, I have bought 2 businesses. So lost opportunities, but follow up, put dates down, use a planner. One of the things a planner does, and I've used the Franklin Planner for 30 plus years now, is it gives you the ability to forget. Is that if I want to follow up with someone in 2 weeks, I go out in 2 weeks, I diary call so-and-so, okay? The listening skills, again, if you're nervous about looking somebody in the eyes, stare between their eyes. It'll look the same, but people who don't look you in the eye or look away, you wonder about. I once made a call with a salesperson, joint call, and he was delivering a price increase. So he's sitting across from a buyer. The whole time he was just looking down like this. He wouldn't look at the buyer, and that told me from the beginning, you don't believe in what you're doing here. So eye contact is important. Okay, so those are doofus tests. Test yourself. Biggest one that I would initially say is make sure you are early, at least on time, but early. and see how many meetings do I come to that I'm late for and end up starting to apologize. Again, for me, that's huge. But go through this, listen to those things that I mentioned, test yourself against those. Do I do this? Do I prepare? Do I take notes? Do I follow up? All the things that I just talked about. And you will make a much, much better first impression, and you will pass the Doofus test. If you show up late, if you're not prepared, if you don't dress appropriate, if you've got a background in a Zoom meeting with dirty clothes on a bed, you are going to fail the Doofus test. And remember, a lot of this is talking to the person, paying attention, listening, and having questions that you want to ask ahead of time, bullet point items, not a script. The script can be something you know how you're going to say that bullet point, certainly, but then you're controlling the discussion, and most of the time those are interviews. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that you pass the Doofus test, and you will be well served if you remember those things. So if you don't know the steps, go over to the brucewhipple.com. The Acquisition Advantage Bootcamp is the best that I've produced. We just this week had the Q&A, which I do. It's a live Q&A for bootcamp members only of the Acquisition Advantage. We spend an hour. I answer questions live, certainly. If you are looking for how to start conversations, again, grab the free course, Conversation Starters. And if you want to go there directly, brucewhipple.com/get class. And lastly, for those of you who are serious about this, really serious, I do have some openings in the VIP Mastermind. Go look on my website as to what that entails. Understand the financial and time commitment. Ignore the sold out. I like to talk to people before I take their money and let them in the mastermind. But email me at bruce@brucewhipple.com if that's something you want to do, and we'll talk and we'll see if we're a fit or not. So I hope it's helpful. I hope you passed the Doofus test, and if you had ones in there that you failed on, make sure you correct those.